Can supply chains ensure sustainability? I'm joined by two analysts from Accenture. Kris Timmermans is Senior Director of Strategy Consulting and Supply Chain and Operations Lead. Hello, Kris.
Hey, Bob, how's it going?
Good. Thank you for being with me. And Matias Pollmann-Larsen is Sustainability Lead for Supply Chain and Operations. Hello, Matias.
Hello, Bob. Thanks for having me.
Good to have you both. Thanks so much for coming on to talk to me about this crucial issue. Let me start with a question for Kris, just a general one, actually. What is the role of supply chains in the fight against climate change today?
Yeah, Bob, on their role, they play a key role in winning the battle against climate change. So if you look at supply chains, they are the biggest or one of the biggest emitters of carbon emissions. So it's about 60% of global emissions come from supply chain. It's actually nearly 50% of the emissions come from just 7 broad supply chains. So it's about food, fast-moving consumer goods, fashion, automotive, electronics, freight, construction, and they make up this portion. If you look at an average company, 5.5 times the rest of the company would be the supply chain emissions. So they are obviously part of a solution in all of this, but they're also part of being the biggest victim because if you look at the biggest disruptions to business, it's actually caused by climate change through the supply chain. To understand this a bit better, let's think about extreme weather events. So there is absolute scientific evidence that global warming caused by climate change, that the global warming causes more frequent extreme weather events and spreads them out in the world more broadly. And that is causing the supply chain disruptions. So when you look at our research report, we investigated this with almost 1,300 CEOs. So it's very broad based. And we did this together with the United Nations Global Compact Council. And actually 49% of CEOs, so this is almost half of the CEOs, are stating that they are really struggling with these supply chain disruptions caused by extreme weather events. Actually, even 25%, so 1 out of 4, are calling this one of the biggest top 3 risks for the future of their business. Caused by these supply chain disruptions. So overall, there is no alternative than to create a resilient, responsible supply chain and really address emissions, circularity, and trust, and build sustainability in everything. Right. Everything they do in supply chains.
No choice at all. Interesting observation, essential observation. Well, let me ask you, Matias. Supply chain leaders are faced with so much pressure just to survive today. There are so many things out there that it's just causing them to put their attention on just the crisis of the moment. So how can they actually prioritize sustainability in the way that Kris is saying is absolutely necessary?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. We just heard it. Supply chains play a pivotal role in climate change, both for their contribution and how they are affected by it. But on top, CEOs are under pressure to put sustainability highest on the agenda. Our data shows that actually 3 out of 4 CEOs globally agree that sustainability has an immediate priority, is an immediate priority as they deal with the fallout of COVID. Look, if we put it first, the business case for sustainability has never been clearer. Consumers are more attentive. Accenture research shows 74% of consumers actually believe that ethical corporate practices and values are an important reason to choose a brand. The talent scarcity around the globe is enormous, and companies that are good and sustainable actually attract those scarce talent out there. You might even be prevented to enter an entire market because of your low environmental, social, and governance scores, preventing the expected growth from your investors. Costs are piling up as more regulations are planned. Look at the CO2 trading price in Europe has trebled in the last 12 months. It's unseen. The cost of capital can be very, very painful, especially for CEOs and CFOs. 2/3 of all global capital is allocated through some sort of ESG lens, making it very costly for low performance. So look, investors and shareholders are lowering their valuation premium on companies exposed to ESG risks. That's right, because two, the stakes has never been higher.
Mhm.
We have seen the biggest jump in activist investor power in the board, and that matters to CEO. Consumer activists and lawsuits that matter to the CEOs. The piling regulation that makes them directly accountable, for example, to child labor happening in your supplier that you might not even be aware it exists. And it is clear why. If some of these risk materializes, CEOs can see 30-40% of the company value will be wiped out, vaporized instantly, as
Wow,
we have seen for some
that's
of
a
the things
lot.
in the past.
Yeah, yeah. So as if it weren't enough that it's just doing the right thing, it's also good business, essential business. Is an excellent point. Well, Kris, let me ask you this though. The report that you guys came out with talks about technology as being a key enabler to ensure sustainability in supply chains. Tell me a little bit more about what you're talking about when you use the phrase technology. Can you be more specific?
Yeah, and then what the report calls out, Bob, is that 75% of the CEOs have actually started advancing and accelerating their digitization of supply chain, also with a purpose for sustainability. And so let me demystify this. If you look at a modern supply chain, it's got to be simultaneously prioritizing customer, environment, and society, and it's got to do this in a resilient and profitable manner. But if you think about a supply chain, this is high volume business. You got millions of picks, you got thousands of SKUs. You cannot do this manually anymore. And so, especially when the algorithm becomes even more complex, you have to optimize for even more parameters. The humans in the supply chain, they need really algorithms, they need intelligence to make the decisions for the supply chain. And you can only generate that intelligence by having the data. And to having the data, you need to digitize the supply chain. So that's why these things are linked and why digital technologies are so essential. Let me use a couple of examples, bring it really to life. If you go to scope 3 in emissions, that's actually a big portion of scope 3 sits with your suppliers, thousands of suppliers. And so a company needs the intelligence of the scores, the environmental, the ESG data of all those suppliers. And holding that intelligence is requiring digital technology. It actually then provides the intelligence for their decision-making on what supplier to use and optimize the journey of emissions or emission reduction, but also helps them develop action plans so they can actually work with suppliers, collaborate with suppliers to reduce the suppliers' emissions in the purpose of their company. And so doing this requires blockchain. And that's what the report also calls out. 6 out of 10 CEOs see a significant impact of blockchain technology in this space, connecting the data from all your partners, and see that emerge as a critical impacted item or a critical technology for the next 5 years. Another example is digital twin technology, Bob. So this is where, for example, you can actually model the behavior of your supply chain as a network. Well, digital technology, 44% of the CEOs call that a significant technology for their future, because it allows you to constantly optimize your network, have less shipping time, less mileage traveled, less fuel, and therefore less emissions. So just a couple of examples.
Yeah, that's a lot of really some major innovations there. Well, Matias, what other actions other than that can you tell us about the supply chain leaders can take right now to help their companies become more sustainable?
Look, to solve that, executives, when I talk with executives, we talk about 3 questions. And it's not to oversimplify it, but it helps bring it down. What is the impact of material resources that we use as a company to create the value that we create? And that's what we call circular, the materials, the waste and the rest. What is the footprint we leave behind in creating that value? And of course, climate and CO2 is the biggest in the house, but let's not forget pollution, ecosystem impact, biodiversity. Fundamentally, how can you apply the transparency, traceability, and intelligence you need to be trusted. Because that is the fundamental link, the trust, that connects what you do on your sustainability journey with value creation, with, be able to gain a premium to your consumer, being able to actually lower your cost towards regulators. So we talk about, with supply chain leaders, about three broader actions in three areas. How can you treat carbon as a business cost? Carbon pricing integral at a micro and macro level to the company's decision making. So you can have even companies place a carbon cost on internal travel, and then put that into investment into sustainability, or even give it to shareholders. Kris, you mentioned the example on scope 3 fundamentals. Scope 3 emissions is fundamental. 80-90% of some of the sectors and the industries entire footprint is scope 3. And here is how do you map, you assess your emission, your hotspot in your suppliers and supplier, and you benchmark, and how you can leverage technology and intelligence to collaborate and make it a force for good, because you have a stronger market position. And then protecting the workforce. The workforce needs new skills to succeed in a digital driven and resilience environment. But actually, only 38% of supply chain executives find their people ready to use the tools. Businesses should be looking to diversify the workforce, geographically, but less than a quarter of CEOs says that the diversity is what they want to be. And health, major climate-related risk. So, take that action for health coverage provision the entire workforce.
Both of you have made a very compelling case for why supply chains and international companies need to move now on achieving sustainability and fighting climate change in their supply chains. I want to thank both of you from Accenture, Kris Timmermans and Matias Pollmann-Larsen. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you very much, Bob. It was a pleasure doing this.